Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Embracing Autism IRL. Today's guest is Nate Hallquist, and Nate is a 48-year-old primary stay-at-home dad of three amazing kids. He's a Navy veteran, computer geek, music lover, trivia host, and budding neurodivergent advocate. Nate loves working with his hands on cars and bicycles and figuring out how things work. And interestingly, in the past 18 months, Nate has actually gone through a journey of self-discovery where he's recently learning that he's both ADHD and autistic. As part of this process, Nate is learning as much as possible about these diagnoses and as well about himself. Today, he joins us to share his experience of self-discovery thus far. So welcome, Nate, and thank you so much for coming to Embracing Autism IRL. How are you today?
I'm doing well. It's been a little chaotic because it's a weekend, but thank you for having me on. I hope your day's going well.
Yeah, it's going okay. I've got like two toddlers, and so that's always chaotic, and they're both autistic, so that adds a lot of fun to the mix, but as fun as it can be.
Exactly.
Um, I'm sure you can relate because I think
Oh yeah.
your kids are neurodiverse as well, correct?
We're positive about our son. My kids are 9, 7, and 6, and we know our son is ADHD. We think that he might have some autistic tendencies. We're in the process of getting our 7-year-old daughter tested for ADHD right now. And our youngest, I don't mean to sound flippant, but we're not sure what to think about her right now. She's very clever, very smart, very all over the place. And we're just waiting to see if we think she needs to be tested as well. But
Yeah,
she has the attention span of the most amazing attention.
really.
She picks up on everything, whether you think she's listening or not.
That's the opposite of my youngest. My youngest is so hard. I'm pretty sure she's going to have ADHD, but we haven't been able to diagnose because she's too young.
Yeah.
Um, but let's go ahead and start off with just having you tell me a little bit about yourself.
Um, you said a good amount there at the beginning. You said that over the past 18 months, I've been learning a lot about myself, and it wasn't just the pandemic. It wasn't just having the kids home all the time because of distance learning. We also had my in-laws living with us for 14 out of 19 months. And no matter how good a person is, that's just too long. And so I never really had any kind of self-care breaks. And I didn't really know how to take them at the time either. But with all of that going on, I just reached a point that my brain couldn't take it anymore. My wife and I have been together for 13 years, and for almost since the beginning, she's told me things like, "Oh, you're ADD." She jokes that I'm ADHD without the H, but and she always said that I was on the spectrum. She's a kindergarten teacher, and so she's used to seeing, especially kids with autism. And I never took it really seriously. I always thought she was just sort of pet naming type of thing, where she's like, "Oh, look, you're cute. Oh, look, you have a little, like, these little spectrumy tendencies or ADHD." And I'm like, well, I've been successful for this long. Why is this a big deal? And I never thought it really was until I got diagnosed with ADHD. And then it's like my world opened up. And I started learning just so much about myself and realizing that my brain could work better. But as I was doing that, there was a lot that occurred to me that, hey, if my ADHD meds are working and they're working well, why am I still having these other things? And it just started making sense as I learned more about autism, especially late diagnosed autism. It was like reading an owner's manual about my own brain. Nothing had ever made sense to me more than that did. Everything just opened up like, oh my God, I'm not just weird. Like this stuff is real. There are other people like me out there. This is written down. Like this is my life written down in front of me.
So my question there, so you said that you found out you were ADHD. What was this in late adulthood as well, or was this earlier on? At what point in life did you find out?
I got diagnosed with ADHD about a year and a half ago. So
Oh,
February of
wow.
2021.
I don't know how you function, because I didn't get my diagnosis until right before college, and I don't even like I got it because I was having such a hard time surviving in high school and everything. And had I not gotten that, I don't think there's any way I could have like really survived in college after that. So I'm impressed
Uh,
that you flew under the radar for so long.
the way I've been saying it, and I think this makes a lot of sense to me at least. I say that I was always able to portray normal enough to not be obvious, to not be obviously neurodivergent, but I was always weird enough to not be taken seriously. And
Hmm.
I mentioned this to my therapist, I think it was last week, that I said, I I learned at a young age that I can take shortcuts to get to where I'm expected to be. And I think I'm awful at masking. I think I am absolutely just mind-blowingly terrible at it. But I was always able to convince myself, and I know now that it was at the expense of my own self-care, that I could take these shortcuts to get to where I needed to be. And all it ever did was just leave me drained and frustrated. And
Can you sorry, I was just gonna ask
no, go
you,
ahead.
you mentioned masking. Can you like let our audience know what that means?
Uh, like I said, I feel like I'm really terrible at it because I've been telling people about that my autism diagnosis and my ADHD, and a huge portion of people are like, "Oh yeah, I figured that out." I'm like, then why didn't anybody ever tell me? But masking is, it seems like the people who are better at it consciously do it. They try to pick up on social cues and expectations in society of how to compose themselves and how to act more neurotypical. So the tics and the fidgeting and the rocking back and forth, which I tend to do kind of a lot. The issues with, some people have issues with punctuality, whether it's they hate to be, hate to be early or hate to be late or whatever, or um, what's the word? Routines and schedules and things like that. Like it, there's little things that I've learned that people have a real problem with, and masking is sort of forgetting what you normally do and what you're normally comfortable with, and trying to exist as a neurotypical in a neurotypical society when that's not how your brain works.
So you said then you were unable to mask. So that leads me to ask you then, how do you think that this autism was impacting your everyday life, especially if you weren't able to mask?
In short, it always made me feel out of place, pretty much everywhere I went. Um, I'm one of the people that I think I do really well with schedules and routine, but the schedule and routine frustrates me sometimes too, because whenever I get out of that schedule or routine, it's really hard for me to um, sort of contain myself. And not that I go wild, and but it's hard to find where I'm supposed to be or how I'm supposed to be doing something. And for a long time, I really did. I think just subconsciously, I realized I should have been trying to mask, but all that ever did was make me feel more out of place. Like I wasn't being myself and I couldn't be myself. And so,
Did you find other ways of self-accommodating, or did you just kind of live yourself authentically, like 100% authentically yourself?
uh, that's kind of funny because that's sort of about the time I met my wife. And I had always just wondered why some of the things I did, whether I thought they were funny or interesting or clever or even smart or anything like that, was always met with people just kind of staring at me like why did you say that? And so I made uh, it wasn't like turning a switch, but I made kind of a conscious decision of, okay, if I'm just going to be quiet and keep to myself, and people are going to think I'm weird, and if I open my mouth and say what's on my mind, and people are still going to think I'm weird, then why don't I just say what's on my mind? Why don't I just do it? And I'm going to tell you a little story about something my wife used to say about me, which at the time it was kind of funny. I hated it from the start, but everybody else thought it was funny, so I just sort of ignored it and went along. She said I was a social Kanye West, when around the time that Kanye West interrupted Taylor Swift. He says, I'm going to let you finish, but here's this random topic. And so she would call me social Kanye, and I despised that nickname. I hated it so much. But everybody else thought it was funny, and I hate to admit it, but it kind of fit. So I was like, fine. I'll say my piece, and if everybody, is wondering like, why are you doing that? I'll be like, cool, I'm out. I'll see you.
That's funny though. I mean, I think that she was poking a little fun, but it's kind of adorable too. You got your own nickname.
It is, and I'm not a fan of Kanye West.
That's why it's funny though, right? That makes it more funny.
I think that was a big part of it, but it made me feel very self-conscious. And I don't mind feeling self-conscious if it's sort of like a personal thing. But when someone else is going like, oh, look, you're like that jerk on TV who did that thing. And I'm like, oh, crap.
Yeah, especially if it's public. I can see how that would be really, yeah. So I think that you had told me prior to the show that you're kind of like in this self-discovery process. And as part of this, there's kind of the term of self-diagnosis that came up. And so I wanted to ask some questions about the diagnosis process for you and just your thoughts on everything. So have you actually pursued diagnosis for autism? And if so, what barriers have you faced, if any, while you were trying to seek a diagnosis?
I currently am. I started in what month is it now? It's June.
Yes.
About 4 months ago, I started the actual process of being officially diagnosed. For about 3 or 4 months before that is when I started really thinking to myself and out loud to others. I'm a giant geek as far as I get on a topic. This is like my special interest, they call it a lot, is right now my special interest is pretty much autism. I want to know as much as possible, especially just about myself. So I went through a lot of it sort of internally. And when I started telling some other people, like I texted a friend of mine and I said, I think I might be autistic. And her response back was, so? I was like, that's a great response. Like either it's just not a big deal to her, or maybe she already kind of realized it and I was the last person to the party. But that's cool. And I told my wife, and to quote her, she goes, God, finally.
So she was on this way before you were. She's like, I can't wait till he figures this out. I'm like 30 steps ahead.
I've told her before, I said, it's awesome that you recognize what autistic is, what autism is. I said, but you have no idea how this feels. Mm-hmm. Like, this is so eye-opening and amazing and also frustrating, because since I've been on this and starting to understand how my brain works, especially throughout my entire life, pushing almost 50 years old, my brain keeps going back, and I say that it is repairing my memories of a lot of things I never understood as I've been going through life, that all of a sudden I can look back and go like, oh my God, whether it's good that I missed something or bad, or just a lot of things that didn't go quite like I thought they should, is because I didn't even know what I should have been assuming, what I should have been expecting, because I wasn't fully engaged in my own head.
Yeah, that happens a lot. It's kind of part of that self-discovery where things start to suddenly make sense and become clear. And like back in the past, like I know before I had like my diagnoses, I was always like, well, I must just be dumb or I must just not get it. And then you find out like, oh, wait a minute. It's just like I need things phrased in a certain way or done a certain way, or I need more structure, or this or that. So I definitely see how that kind of requires you to kind of dig back in your memories and reprocess them because you might not really have remembered things how they actually were happening.
I said that it's like watching that old movie that you might have seen when you were a kid, and it's got that it's got those lines or that humor or something where, as an adult, you watch it and you go like,
Yes.
oh, and it's not just a throwaway line. It's not just something where it's a adult themed joke where to kids not getting it, it doesn't deal with the movie at all. But it's one of those things where it's a line, and as a kid you might go, okay, I don't understand. But as an adult, you go like, oh, that's why they did that. That's why this thing ended up the way it did, is because I didn't understand it before.
That's a really great example, actually. That's right on the nose. That's exactly how it feels. So, have you found that while you were seeking a diagnosis, did you find that that was easy to do, or was it really difficult to find
Mm.
someone to even take a look at you at this stage in life? Because a lot of times they just focus on children and it's a lot harder for adults.
I just realized that you asked that before, and I forgot I didn't even answer it. So I'm sorry.
You're fine.
I first was talking to my VA therapist who helped me get the ADHD diagnosis, and she basically preliminarily said that yes, I'm probably autistic, but she also said that the VA considers autism a childhood diagnosis.
Mm.
And I was just like, really? How can you narrow it down that much when you probably have so many military people with, complex issues going on in their own head, whether it's PTSD or, late diagnosis of these things or something, and just go, oh, well, that's a childhood diagnosis. Well, I'm not a kid, but I can still have it. But it was really difficult for a little while. I think I got lucky finding the therapist I did, but there's a lot of therapists out there who don't have any availability right now, number one. And
Mhm.
number two, there's even fewer that will work with an adult on late diagnosis of autism. And even then, if it doesn't work in your health insurance, uh, I got sent to another website where it said that, oh, well, we do the diagnosis of autism and things like that, but it was like $6,000 to get the testing
Yeah.
done. And I'm like,
Mhm.
who just carries around $6,000 to do this? Oh, hey, I've got this little, vanity project. It felt like this thing of, hey, I want to know if I'm autistic. And for a while, until I actually started with this therapy, I was going like, well, I guess it's not that important to get diagnosed. If I have to spend $6,000 to possibly get diagnosed, then I don't know if that's worth it. But then
Mhm.
the therapist I found is absolutely astounding. They luckily she works with my insurance, and she's also currently going through the certification to officially diagnose autism. And so I'm just like, oh, my heart, this is better than I could have imagined.
You
And
got
so
really lucky.
I got astoundingly lucky, but I know that it's very, very, very difficult to find this stuff. It just happened to work out that way for me.
I think that oftentimes what I hear from people is, like you said, there's usually a really big, hefty financial barrier. I don't think I've seen any diagnosis cheaper than, I think the cheapest I've seen is like maybe like $800 cash, not able to use insurance. And then they range to like $10,000. So what do you think, along with the financial aspect of it, what do you think are some possible ways to create more accessibility to autism diagnoses for adults?
Uh, to put it really simply, I think people just need to listen better. Uh, some of the some of the worst part of this for me is it's the best and the worst. Like going on Facebook and social media, I've found so much information on autism that I've never thought it was that deep. I for a long time I was one of those people that thought like, okay, well there's high functioning and then there's like nonverbal low functioning or Asperger's or type 1, 2, and 3. I know they don't use those anymore, but it's really a spectrum that some people are everybody's just so different. But with that difference, there's a lot of gatekeeping that goes on. There's a lot of people who say that, oh, well, we don't support self-diagnosis. And I'm like, well, why not? Who's going to know me better than I know myself? Yes, people can ask me questions like, well, do you do this? Do you do that? Do you have this impact? Do you not have that impact? And I can say yes or no. It's like, okay, well, I'll use the terms where it's like, okay, well, maybe I'm not as high functioning as this person, but I'm also lower functioning than this other person. So it's this crazy balance. And for people to just go, oh, well, if you're not officially diagnosed, then you're not autistic. Like, well, what if I am? And it's the kind of infighting and the people taking everything personally and saying, well, that's not autism. Like, well, it may not be for you, but it is for these other people. It is for me. Why are you arguing about this? Why can't we try to just listen to each other and learn something? And that it involves the doctors and the therapists too, because you say, oh, well, it's something that you said earlier. I know you didn't mean it poorly, but you go like, well, I've made it this far. Well, that doesn't mean it hasn't been a struggle. Like I've been fighting against myself for the past 48 years. And now I can actually see why I do these things.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned the term self-diagnosis. What does that mean to you?
To me, personally, it just means that it wasn't somebody else just telling me that I was autistic. It's something that I have learned. It's something that I have looked into and discovered about myself. That yes, my wife has basically told me that I'm probably autistic, and more or less I didn't believe her, and it just because I didn't understand. But now that I've found out more, I can't stop finding out more. I everything about this makes sense. And this is like the first time in my life where it's actually made sense.
I think you said that you are usually online and you definitely have seen the arguments for and against the validity of a self-diagnosis. So I guess my question to you would be, I have seen that there are a lot of people who say that, self-diagnosis is not valid, and that essentially even medical physicians who are experts in their field are not allowed to or would not kind of dare to diagnose themselves. So what would you say in response to individuals who make that argument against self-diagnosis?
The unfortunate thing is that in simply put, they're also right. That someone like me may be right, that I do have autism, but I have not been officially diagnosed. So that makes the doubters, so to speak, 100% correct. That they will look in that go and they would say, well, you're not autistic. Well, for now, yes, but they also, a lot of people say that it is underdiagnosed. And there are a lot of people out there who could have and probably should have been diagnosed earlier in life. So what's the harm in understanding that someone got there a different way than they did? That's kind of where I go. It's like, whether it's suspected autism or self-diagnosed or whatever, it's not, I don't see that as a bad thing that someone got there themselves, especially with all the information that's out there right now. Because even if someone is self-diagnosed, then they can still learn. And even if someone was diagnosed at 6 and they're now 35, you can still learn. you can still listen to other people and say, well, yeah, you have all of the right ideas and you seem a lot like me. But you may not have, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 laying around to go to a doctor and take all these tests and say, well, I want to know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I say, like, I think people should just listen better. People should try to understand that we're not all the same, but we all have the same condition. And I don't want to say like diagnosis or illness or deficit or something. Like we're all have a commonality here.
Like neurological wiring.
Yeah. And that was one of the things I found out is like, it's just like, oh my God, that there are other people like me out there. This is incredible.
Yeah. So I guess I'm a little bit confused on terms of where you stand then in terms of the language, because it does seem on one hand, you're saying, self-diagnosis is valid. At the other side, it sounds like you're also kind of saying it's the same thing as saying suspected autistic. I'm not sure exactly. So I was just wondering, because there's been arguments made that sometimes it's considered more appropriate to say, I am suspected autistic rather than saying self-diagnosed. So do you think there's a meaningful difference between those two terms? Do you think it's just semantics? Do they mean the same thing? Are they different?
To me, suspected sounds a bit more like someone telling you that you're suspected. Like if it were my parents back when I was, a child going, oh, well, little Nathan there is suspected autistic. I feel like I grew up in the wrong generation to be easily seen as this, because I was just always the tag kid. I was talented and gifted. I was special. I was different. I needed special accommodations in order to learn the same way other kids did. But it was never explained to me why. I thought that I wasn't some like super self-aware uberkind or something, but I thought everybody went through these things. I thought everybody had these little quirks and learning experiences that they had to go through that maybe they didn't understand. And I'm sure some people do, but to go through everything I did, I realized now I'm like, oh my God, my friends weren't just like me. I wasn't just like them. That I needed some of these things probably because I was autistic. And to me, that's suspected. Whereas self-diagnosis, I think, is something more that happens in adulthood, where you get frustrated with the world and you try to figure out why. Why am I different? Why is this not make sense to me? Why don't I fit in? Why do I feel like I'm just so unique, and not in always a good way, but just that's self-diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. Like an alien observing the world, but not quite part of it.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. I write on the notes. Like I the way I've said it is a lot like that. It's like I was watching the world without truly experiencing it because I didn't know how.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to do my best, but my best was never correct.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to say correct, because then that implies that the neurodiverse brain is incorrect. But I get what you're saying. That's just
correct.
Semantics.
Correct to me.
Correct.
I couldn't interact with the world the way that I felt like I should.
Right. Like something's felt off,
Yes.
know?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I can totally relate to that. That's exactly what I went through growing up. So then what would you say, if you could give any piece of advice to other people who may be going down a similar path that you've been going down, where they're just now starting to discover that they might be autistic, or they're starting to kind of dabble into looking into that as a possible explanation for their life experience?
I've had this experience with actually some friends of mine who have come to me and said, thank you for posting all this stuff, all this information that you find on your personal Facebook and on your your page and things like that. And my advice to them is keep going. You're going to have doubts. You're going to have imposter syndrome. You're going to think that you've got something wrong just because something you read or something you feel or something you see or someone you meet or something you hear doesn't apply to you. That doesn't mean that you're on the wrong path. Keep going. Keep finding out more. If this makes sense to you, if this is something that feels real in your core, then keep going. Don't doubt it for a second. Find out more. Find out as much as you possibly can and see how you're affected by it and how you can improve yourself. And that's one of the things that I want to do for this, is that I want to show my kids that no matter how old I am improving myself. I want to be a better, not just be a better person, but I want to understand myself better. I want to be the best person that I can be, not only for my family, my wife, my kids, but myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that once you become a parent, like things kind of become a new perspective, because anything that we might struggle with, just, genetically, there's chances they might struggle with as they grow up too. So
Mhm.
I fall into that too, where I'm like, I want to solve all these things before it's my kids' turn so I can at least provide them with some answers that I didn't have when I was growing up. I don't know if that's part of your thought process, but that's
Oh,
just
absolutely. And it's not something I've mentioned, but we became a family about 6 years ago. We adopted our kids. So
no.
if they have different kinds of issues than what I have, it's obviously not genetic because of my wife and I. We couldn't have kids, but I want to show them that this is important. Like, you as a person can do well for yourself and the world. And if you think there is something interesting, whether it's about a topic you're part of or something you want to look into or follow a career path or something just you want to do, or you want to just find out more about yourself, it's okay. Keep going.
That actually leads perfectly into my next question, because I just want to ask you, in terms of parents, so like my audience is primarily parents of autistic children.
Mhm.
What words of wisdom do you think you could share with the parents who are raising this children in terms of any sort of tips or guidance on what would have maybe helped you growing up?
Um, I think one of the things, it's a really, it's not an easy path. Raising kids is extremely difficult, whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent in some way. But no matter how much you want them to be, your kids are never going to be exactly the same as you. They're never going to be the same person. Try to understand that when they get things wrong, even if it's blatantly wrong as just a thing that happens, or it's something wrong that you just think might be the wrong way to go, it's like, let them be them, let them figure it out, and you can help them with that. It's important that you help them be a I hate to say regular person, that sounds very neurotypical, but be a good person, but let them be themselves, let them find their way, and you can help them do that. That if your child is neurotypical, just understand that they're going to have some struggles that maybe you didn't, or maybe their classmates didn't, or things along that line. So you can help them over those stumbling blocks and barriers and things like that. But they sometimes they have to figure it out themselves. Maybe they just, like my 9-year-old son reads at a high school level already.
Hmm.
My middle girl, she probably is naturally the smartest of our three kids. She is obsessed with language. And our youngest, like I told you before, she's very aware of everything. Like, she might be listening to me right now, and even she's in the other room. And I don't doubt that at all, just because she's surprised me before.
She's got to
But
keep you on your toes.
yeah, and those things I am in awe of, because I don't like to read that much, not like my son does, and he's obsessed with it. And my middle girl is obsessed with language. Like she's probably gonna be one of those people that's fluent in 9 languages just because she wants to be. Our youngest is hilarious. She is a prankster and a jokester since she was a baby. And some of these things I'm like, I can see, even though they're adopted, I can see my wife and my personality in these kids. They're learning a lot from us, but they have their own life too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a delicate balance. It's hard juggling act, but it's worth it. It's amazing to see these little humans.
Absolutely.
I know that's kind of long-winded. I'm sorry, but
no, that's great. I honestly, I think raising kids, you know, there's so much complexity to it. So it's always interesting to get people's perspectives because everybody has a very different perspective. I also just, we're wrapping up here, but I want to ask you, as you know, the name of this podcast is Embracing Autism. And I like to ask people their opinions on what they think that term means to them. So to you specifically, in an ideal world, what would embracing autism look like? What would that mean?
Just no stigma about it. With a lot of people, they still think autism is this disease. They still think that there should be some cure for it, or that the really awful argument of, oh, vaccines cause autism. Like, no, stop that. Like, autism is a part of who you are, and it's part of your brain, which means it is who you are. That instead of thinking that this is something wrong, look at it as this is something just different. That every autistic person I've met so far is astonishingly good at something. Like, instead of trying to make them better at everything else, why not focus on this thing that makes them unique, that makes them special, and use that, include it, and just don't look at autism as something that needs to be fixed. It's not something that we chose. It's not something that I chose, but I know what I'm really good at, and I know what I'm not good at, and that's okay. I know neurotypical people who are really bad at things, and sometimes it's hard not to judge, but everybody is their own person, and it shouldn't be a bad thing to just be autistic. And I want to own that. I want people to look, and the people who go, really? You're autistic? And I go, this is what autism looks like. There's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing right about it either. There's nothing normal, but this is what it can be.
Yes, I know from a lot of conversations that I've had with like parents of autistic children, one of the most frustrating comments that they get all the time is like, oh, really? They don't look autistic. And the parents
Exactly.
are always like, what does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. Where are you getting this from?
Yeah. It's not
So,
it's not like looking at someone and they have black hair or blonde hair, or they have dark skin or light skin, or they're short or they're tall.
yeah.
It's the pilot inside my head is just a little off, just a little
Yeah.
different than yours.
I feel like the only way you could see autism is like with an fMRI or something. Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe even not. Who knows? So, is there anything else that you would like to share that I may not have perhaps given you the opportunity to share?
Just to sort of reiterate to people that it's okay to be autistic. I think it's awesome, actually. Since I've been on this process, I think it's really cool. And I know that it's not the same for everybody. I know that some things are going to be a lot harder for other people. I know that some things are going to be a lot easier for other people, but it's not something to be ashamed of, whether it's something you have, or a child, or a parent, or a loved one, or a friend, or something. Like, that's something that I'm still learning myself, to be honest. Is I've known a lot of autistic people in my life. I've realized one of our best friends is autistic. we run a we help run a my wife and I help run a bicycle camp in the summer for special needs children and young adults to learn how to ride bicycles that these people may not ever be able to get a driver's license. But if they can ride a bike, that gives them a certain measure of freedom. And there's Downs kids and CF and neurodivergent and autistic and things like that. And it really struck me as I go through this process. I go, oh my gosh, those are my people. This is something that I love to do and I can help. And not only am I just helping, but I can relate to these people.
That's amazing.
It just,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt,
no,
but I just want to call that
fine.
out. Like, I've never heard of such a program, but that's a really amazing idea. I really appreciate that you're doing that.
I hope she doesn't mind me saying her name. Now that I say it, I'm actually wearing the sweater right now.
Oh, is that what that is? Bike First?
Bike First.
Okay.
Wow. The lady who runs it, her name is Anne. And I live in the Portland, Oregon area. I live in Gresham, so we do it locally here. But I know there are some other camps around the country who do things like this. But to just see that, not only in myself, but in other people, I say, it's not a problem. This isn't something wrong with anybody. And in the computer jargon, you probably have heard this. They say it's not a bug, it's a feature.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with how I am. This is how I am. This is how we are. And I think that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really positive note to end this on. So I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm going to look more into your Bike First program because that looks really cool. And I just wanted to just ask you where our followers can listen to you or follow you online. Do you have any social medias or anywhere they can reach you?
I'm primarily on Facebook. My personal Facebook is nathan.hallquist. And I also have a Facebook page where I do a lot of autism, ADHD, neurodivergent stuff. It's called at Divergent Dad. The full title of the page is Adventures of a Divergent Dad. And it's just fun. It's just kind of a fun thing for me. I also have created some sort of silly, funny t-shirts on TeePublic, TEE Public. And my page there is called Neurodivergent HQ. And HQ in this aspect doesn't stand for headquarters. It's a nickname for my last name. It's Hallquist. So
that's clever.
my wife goes by Miss HQ at school, and I was Mr. HQ there for I guess I still am, but
yeah, you still are technically.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So if anybody wants to follow me on my Divergent Dad page, I'll post links for the t-shirts and anything else I find interesting. So
yeah, so they can find everything you mentioned here. They just follow you, and hopefully they'll find links to this stuff.
Yeah, and like I said before, if you think you're autistic, if you think you're neurodivergent, keep going. It's okay. You might be judged, but you shouldn't judge yourself. Make yourself whole. Like live your correct life, your right life. Like they say, live your best life.
And on that positive note, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. I love hearing stories like yours, and I really wish you the best of luck on your journey of self-discovery. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was unexpected, but this is the best thing that I loved it. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much.